if you really interacting with anyone in society, say you work at a hospital and you're discharging patients, or you are even in the criminal justice, a Department of Corrections, and you're working with reintegration of people into society, cash could be beneficial to your clients, particularly if they're being discharged without some sort of without a place to go, our mission is to prevent, reduce, and alleviate homelessness through the effective coordination of coordinated community-wide efforts and services. CACH is responsible for the coordination and delivery of housing and supportive services within, I'll get my code, within the Crater area, and it's a big area. Petersburg, Colonial Heights, Hopewell, Dinwiddie, Prince George, Surrey, Sussex, Greenville, Emporia. Really, from Richmond to North Carolina, we cover 2/3 of that area south of here. So it's a vast geographic area. And so if you're not a member of CACH, we would welcome you, and I think that your membership would benefit people who are your clients as well. Next slide. Presenters. Oh, look at these lovely ladies. My goodness, these are good pictures. Your presenters this afternoon include myself, Kailey, Sweeney. I am the still relatively new Continuum of Care Coordinator with St. Joseph's Villa, as well as Amanda Browder, Grants Manager, Erica Holmes, our Director of Operations, if you want to say hi, and of course, our amazing, we're all these women are amazing, but Jackie, oh my goodness, Jackie is amazing. The amazing Jackie Kent, our AmeriCorps Vista, what do I, anyway, she, many hats. She is AmeriCorps Vista wearer of many hats with St. Joseph's Villa. Next slide. Unless anyone else has to say more about themselves, I think we're not here to learn about us. Okay, what will we cover? Well, housing first. What is it? How does it work? What are the benefits of it? And then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. Okay, so what is it? Pretty simply, it's an approach to successfully connect individuals and families experiencing homelessness to permanent housing without preconditions or barriers to entry. What might these be? You know, I used to work in a shelter system in a rural county, and we had initial barriers to entry, like you can't smoke. You can't come in drinking. You can't come in with the smell of alcohol on your breath. All of those things, sobriety, no smoking, even barriers of mental health meant a lot of people didn't stay. They would come and they go, I can't smoke. And they would turn around and leave. And so it's middle of winter and it might be 17 degrees at night. And that was a barrier for them of staying in a warm place. So housing first means no, very low barriers. So it's applicable in a variety of housing models. Yes, scattered site models such as housing people into apartments, single site models. This, because of COVID this year, instead of congregating people into, say, one building or a church, they're being housed in hotels and hotel rooms. And then set-asides. Would someone like to describe set-asides? That's a question that I meant to ask earlier. So if Amanda or Erica would. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Set-asides might be like private rental units where they have it's market rate, but they set aside maybe 10% of their apartment complexes for affordable housing, for either permanent supportive housing or for a different rate. So yeah, that's what that is.
I see. Okay. Yeah, there is actually a banking requirement that banks of a certain size invest a certain amount in community housing projects, which I found interesting. Okay, next slide. History of housing first. All right. Well, I think it really has an interesting history. It first grew out of, and you can read this, but I'm just going to talk about it generally. It first grew out of a desire to end homelessness with people who were experiencing mental health conditions in New York City, particularly people who had long stays in mental health facilities. At the time, in the 1990s, the predominant model for housing people who were experiencing homelessness was a service first model. In other words, there were barriers that a person had to get over, and sometimes met several barriers before they could get into housing. And this was based on an outdated assumption about people experiencing homelessness, and that is that, well, that they experienced severe mental health illnesses, that they were in need of drug treatment or something else before they would be able to be stable in housing. Well, for one thing, that doesn't apply to everyone experiencing homelessness. And the other thing is that people who do experience or some kind of a spectrum of mental health or substance abuse are, once they are in housing, it gives them a lot of benefits. Instead of being required to be sober or to receive treatment, you get into a place where you have a degree of social integration. If you're not living minute to minute on the street, wondering where you're going to stay tonight, where you're going to get your next meal, it allows you to relax. It allows you to build connections with other people. It allows to give a sense of well-being. And then also people have a freedom of choice as to whether they want to accept that housing or not, whether or not they want to accept some kind of treatment for mental health or substance abuse. And so what ends up happening is a larger number of people end up staying in housing, whereas with the service first model, they never get past those hurdles. They get stuck and can only stay in one place and never get to the housing. So now housing first is recognized and accepted by federal and state government, since it is evidence-based. Tenants accessing housing first programs are able to move into housing faster because they don't have to wait until they have to get over some kind of a barrier. They can move in and then receive the services. Tenants using housing first programs stay longer. A higher percentage of them stay in their housing. Over 90% of tenants accessing housing first programs are able to retain housing. And I've looked at studies where this is true, not just in the United States, but also all over Europe and in other countries where housing first has been adopted, countries like Amsterdam, England, even France. It's been remarkably successful around the world. And it also proves to be far less costly than other systems. Next slide. Let's look at that. Okay, so a few principles regarding housing first, and I alluded to them on the last slide, that homelessness it's an issue of not having a house, not having a place that you can afford. So the answer is start with the house, start with a shelter, start with a place to live, and then find your stability in your other services. But you have a place to stay without having to work through your issues while still experiencing homelessness. All people experiencing homelessness can achieve housing stability with more or less effort. Everyone is housing ready, and everyone is ready to live in a house no matter what your particular condition is. And then self-determination. I think that has to be something that leads to the good outcomes, because people have freedom of choice. It isn't forced upon them. So they have a right to self-determination. Jackie, I see you trying to raise your hand. Did you have something to say there? Oh, okay.
No, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I wasn't
Okay, I
trying
thought
to.
you were going, and I'm going, Jackie, yes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so housing first can be applied to many different populations. Now, while at first it was designed in New York City to help people who were who were experiencing some sort of mental health issue or substance abuse. But we've learned that that is not the spectrum of the people experiencing homelessness. There are veterans, there are kids, there are children with and without guardians, with and without parents experiencing homelessness. There are homeless teens who have been kicked out of their homes because they belong to the LGBT community, and their parents don't want to keep them housed. That I experienced someone coming into the shelter that I worked in Gloucester. From that, I got a call from the police, and there's this young man sitting at on a curb in front of a 7-Eleven, and his dad kicked him out. So it can be families, it can be couples, it can be any number of people. So whatever your assumptions are about who experiences homelessness, well, look in the mirror. Given a different set of circumstances in your life, or given a different level of personal support that you might have from family and friends, it could be any one of us, truly. Next slide. Okay. This is hard work. I'm smiling because Erica, Jackie, Amanda, I know Nathan's on here. I don't see you, but lots of St. Josephsville and CACH folks are out there that do this every day. Yeah. What a week, right? It's hard work. Housing first is hard work, but it's the right thing to do. When you house somebody, you can read these. You aid a client who's been living under a bridge. Yeah, driving through the streets of Richmond, Petersburg, the counties surrounding the area, you'll see people sleeping under bridges. That's their homes. You know, one of the things that I noticed running the shelter is that someone applying for jobs at say a store, a grocery store, a restaurant, and someone's coming in from the street and they haven't been able to take a shower in a week because they haven't had access to one. Yeah, they're not going to get hired because it doesn't make an impression on the employer, a good impression on them. And so when you give somebody a place to take a shower, then they can start to make something of themselves and get a job, because they can take care of things as simple as grooming. Oh, I'll tell you a short story is had a woman who her family had rejected her. She was on the streets. She had breast cancer that metastasized to bone cancer, and she came into shelter, and we were able to place her into a home, and she died under our care. With Housing First, someone might be housed who has a medical condition that affects them gravely, and I hate to think of someone dying on the street or in the woods. It's much better to have a roof over their heads. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to push this to the ridiculous. Enjoy this video.
Great video.
Okay. Okay, so that video really showed us how much Housing First makes sense, but how there is still a lot of pushback from folks who don't really fully understand people who are experiencing homelessness. Now, we know you can find numerous studies on Housing First. We know it works. You can look at evidence in academic journals. You can find evaluations of programs. And you'll find that Housing First, it not only works, but it works for all populations, as Kailey was saying. But that doesn't change the fact that in almost every single community, there are one or more person or organization that thinks that except here, like we're the exception. The fancy word for this is cognitive dissonance, which essentially means that all the data adds up for everyone else except for you. There's this entrenched belief that somehow the population you work with is different, or that your geographical context is different, or that your organization is different, or somehow there's just like a bubble around where you work and all these best practices are not working, which is really unfortunate to someone who is going through the experience of homelessness, because we know after all this research that it does work. So I want to look a little bit at our community context. So census data for CACH area shows that 18% live in poverty. And almost none of those people are or ever will be homeless. I bring this up because people often want you to believe that there is a strong correlation between economic poverty and homelessness, and there's not. Homelessness is an actual very rare event. It doesn't happen that often. And yes, it's true that every person who's experiencing homelessness might be poor, might not have a lot of money, but almost no people who are poor are ever going to be homeless. So it's important to know that distinction. There are around a little over 2,200 federally assisted units in the greater area. Almost everyone that is poor has their housing needs met in the private rental market. So almost no one receives a subsidy, and their housing needs are met or still on a regular basis. The gross median rent, you'll see here for Petersburg is $947, Hopewell $886, Emporia $694, Colonial Heights $1038, and Dinwiddie $1005. That's just a few of our areas. So despite a lot of people being rent burdened, most people are not homeless. And a little more than 300,000 people, or 6% of adults in Virginia, live with a serious mental illness, and only about a little over 1,000 of those people are experiencing homelessness according to our point in time data. So most people with a severe mental illness are housed. And just a little under 500,000 adults have a substance use disorder in Virginia, and only 654 were homeless according to the point in time count. So if we say that there's a need to treat people's substance use disorders, we see that almost no one that has a substance use disorder, it will ever experience homelessness. So most people do figure it out. So we probably have all heard people say things like, all those people, they just need to go get a job, except for we know that most people without a job are housed. You may hear, I don't want my taxes to go towards all those people not trying to better themselves. Except most people, again, as you see, are not living in a federally assisted unit. Subsidies are not easy to get at all. And you may hear, well, the problem is they're not dealing with their mental illness. They just need to take their meds or deal with their issues. Again, that's not true. Not everyone with a mental illness is or ever will be homeless. So let's look at the traditional model, the continuum of services in the way that we have used it traditionally. So the first thing that we usually do is we find people. So what we do is outreach. Maybe some people don't know how to access the system, or those who haven't been homeless for very long don't know how to get services. So we know that outreach is an essential part of the homeless system. After we do outreach, we put them in shelter. You get you safe off the street. And if you do really well there, maybe you'll get transitional housing, a place that you can go and learn some life skills and get you ready for housing. And if then that's done well, you'll go to permanent housing. So we've kind of seen this has been the traditional model. The only huge issue with this is that it has zero evidence that this works. The experiences of people getting out of homelessness is not continuous, and nor is it linear. So the question is, could we do street outreach and have people move directly into housing from the streets? And yes, we can. So we need to focus on the mechanisms by which people who have been rejected by existing services or are choosing to reject existing services don't actually have to go through a bunch of hoops of other services to move directly from being in a park or in the woods or under a bridge or in their car and go directly into housing. So we have to rethink in terms of where we put our resources. There will be a whole group of people you wouldn't even serve on a regular basis if they don't come to your program. So we have to figure out a way to get our programs to them. So should we have shelters? Absolutely. Shelters are really crucial. We need them to operate in a very particular way, though, which is focused on housing attainment. That is to say, shelters need to be short-term. We don't need to try and fix you. What we need to do is to get you out of here as quickly as possible. The worst thing that I think that we can do in a shelter environment is to create some sort of therapeutic incarceration, which is where we want to hold on to you a little bit longer and a little bit longer to try to make you be a little bit better, and then send you on your way. We need to really rethink what resources of programming we're putting into shelters. Now, the question of transitional housing comes up a lot. Do we need it? And no, not really. There's 3 populations of groups where evidence is kind of mixed about whether or not you need transitional housing. So one is for youth 18 to 24, a place and space for youth will be a little different than traditional transitional housing. A second population are for those who are in residential substance use recovery programs, who are coming out of recovery and need a place to stay that is dry while they figure out permanent housing. And then a third group are those who have experienced longer term incarceration. So the key part in all of this is to keep a strong focus on permanent housing, which focuses us to change the question from how can I help you to how can I exit your homelessness and get you into housing. So we see housing as a right and not as a reward. And we don't think you should jump through certain hoops in a certain way. And that our starting premise is that everyone, no matter what, is housable under all conditions.
Housing First has 5 key principles. If you're not following the 5 principles, it's not Housing First. Principle number 1, immediate access to housing with no housing readiness conditions. Participants meet with the support team once per week, but housing is not dependent on psychiatric treatment, abstinence, or other readiness conditions. And when we say no housing readiness conditions, we mean none. Now, many participants stay housed in their first rental, but evictions happen. With the support team's help, it's an opportunity for learning, adjusting, and the immediate chance to try again. Research shows Housing First reduces emergency room visits, hospitalization, shelter use, detox services, and incarceration. There are no common indicators that predict who Housing First will and won't work for. So given its effectiveness, let's focus on Housing First, then let participants tell us the next step. Principle number 2, consumer choice, and self-determination. This principle highlights that participants want and can make productive change occur in their lives. But in order to thrive, meaningful housing options are a necessity, and research shows that a majority of participants prefer independent market housing throughout the city. Now, in order to foster learning and self-determination, it's important that the team support most choices participants make. Though the team can point out expectations, they should avoid overprotecting participants from learning opportunities. When choices have poor outcomes, a supported learning environment promotes more informed choices in the future, reducing long-term harm and increasing self-sustainability. Principle number 3, recovery orientation. People are more likely to do well and achieve personal goals when they have an opportunity to find their own recovery. Housing First relies on supporting people as they work at their pace towards self-defined goals, whether it's treatment, returning to work, or reconnecting with family. The addition of peer workers on the support team addresses power dynamics, increases safety, and models hope for both participants and team members. Finally, by building, following, and reviewing strength-based recovery plans, the support team can spend less time managing crisis and more time on the steps that lead to the participants' goals for recovery. Principle number 4, individualized and person-driven supports. Now, support is meant to fit the participant, not the other way around. People are at the center of Housing First. Therefore, the support team provides appropriate team members, approach, and tools that help each individual with their goals. Whether that's grocery shopping, working, adopting a pet, finances, therapy, or engaging with new communities. By replacing complicated policies with flexible models and a can-do philosophy, the team helps participants reduce long-standing systemic barriers, thereby improving self-determination, choice, and quality of life. Principle number 5, social and community integration. Moving to a new area can be a hard experience for anyone and can make you feel pretty isolated and lonely. The Housing First team can help participants build community connections based on their specific needs and interests. The team also fosters community development by providing landlords and community members with education on Housing First, inclusion, and myth-busting negative stereotypes. And though supporting social and community integration may take time, it can go a long way in helping participants establish relationships and support networks within new communities.
Okay, so now we'll go into how Housing First works and some elements of it. So we have low barrier intake, separation of housing and services, rapid and streamlined entry into housing, the tenants being aware of their full rights and responsibilities and what legal protections are in the community to assist them. And something very important is client choice. Everything that is centered around Housing First and getting someone from homelessness or housing crisis into stable housing is centered around the client's choice and providers walking alongside them to provide support. Next slide. Okay, so we'll go through each area. The low barrier intake. So we want it to be very few programmatic preconditions. So everyone that is experiencing a housing crisis or homelessness is able to access some type of services. Eligibility is only based on the funding source. So a lot of you all may be familiar with what housing funding sources are out there. So that's rapid rehousing assistance, which is short-term rental assistance, permanent supportive housing assistance, whether that is through a mainstream voucher, which is with the housing authority, or in some cases, the VA issues HUD-VASH vouchers. And that is based, the tenants only pay 30% of their income to housing, and the agency of the funding source pays the remaining amount. And that is a long-term subsidy unless, something happens, you are over income, or you violate some kind of guidelines within that. But again, it's only based on, everyone is accepted and screened, and it's only based on the funding source, which even if they're not connected to a funding source, we're still assessing them. We are still providing them what community resources are out there and helping them to solve their crisis. The premise of low barrier intake and taking those, making sure it's not a lot of hoops people have to jump through to get services, is that we are allowing those that are the hardest to serve to access these interventions. We know that people that are experiencing a higher housing crisis and are able to connect with family or friends or community resources because they have access to the internet, or they have connections in the community, can traditionally find a way to solve their housing crisis, right? It is those that do not know the resources that are out there, those that may be suffering from mental illness, or maybe have had long stints or stays on the street. And so transitioning to going into housing, or even being able to know where to go to access housing, is who we are trying to reach with our Housing First premise and the housing interventions that are offered. Policies are designed to screen people in, not screen them out. So it is not about, you don't have ID, we're not talking to you. You don't, you are, and you have substance abuse, we're not talking to you. You're showing signs of mental illness, we can't help you. It's not that at all. We can help everyone. We may not be able, as far as when I spoke about the eligibility on the funding source, they may not be eligible for a specific funding resource, but they're eligible to enter the system and find out what services can move them from their crisis into stable housing. We look at everyone as being essentially eligible, and then just finding what, if any, funding can help them, or what other resources can help them. And I think this specific guide is very hard for a lot of people to grasp when it comes to housing first and screening people in and versus screening people out. Because if you think systematically about programs that are being offered in the community, whether it's you're applying for food stamps or Medicaid or whatever type of utility assistance, you're going through an application to basically being reviewed to see, okay, is this person eligible and we're gonna, move forward, or, oh no, you know what? They didn't include everyone in their household. They lied to us about who was all living there. So we're gonna, put them to the side. We're not gonna help them, and that's not the case. We have people, when we are talking to them, that they may not be forthright. They may not share everything up front when they're first meeting you. They don't know you. And they are working to see how they can get services and access services. So we don't automatically screen someone out based on how they present to us and whether they have all the documents needed. And then the next is that we're not looking through and saying, hey, let's help this person over that person because they have a job. You know, they have income coming in. We're just they're easy to help. They're the low hanging fruit. We'll get better outcomes for HUD, which would be nice, but that's not always the case. We are prioritizing to help those people that have experienced homelessness the longest and have the most need. So those that are hard to engage. You know, we had the slide with Kailey about this is hard work. It is definitely hard work. And those that are in it do have to step back at times due to burnout because it is very difficult. But we want to make sure that we are not disqualifying those individuals or overlooking those individuals that take longer to engage, take longer to access housing, etc. Next slide. So then we talk about rapid and streamlined entry to housing and how the Housing First model makes efforts to help people move into permanent housing as quickly as possible. So ultimately, our goal is that someone is housed within 30 days from the time of intake and then connecting them to a permanent housing resource. We know we're currently seeing challenges with that just because of the affordable housing crisis, but everyone is still being assessed and treated the same at the front door. So whether you in our CACH region specifically talk to someone in outreach with CCC, or you contact a veteran contacts SSVF, or you contact St. Joseph Villa directly, we are asking the same questions, we are gathering the same information, and we're using that coordinated entry process to then determine what is the best housing intervention. So they're screened in, and then they are assessed to say, hey, whether rapid rehousing will work for you, or is this something that you just need some other type of resources because you have the income but don't know where to find a landlord. And then we are gonna connect you with that. But it is a streamlined approach. And our goal is to have, again, the shortest amount of time from intake to housing. And it's never on a first come, first serve basis. It is everyone individually looked at and determine what their exact need is to get into housing. Next slide. All right, so separation of housing and services. I know personally from being a direct service worker and working as a case manager in the community to help those that are homeless get into housing, that it is a difficult concept. But the services are not contingent on you staying sober. They're not contingent on you going to see your doctor and making sure you take your meds every day. You know, they're not based on any of those things that when Amanda was talking about the old housing model, they put upon you that you had to do. You know, you had to save money. You had to go to meetings and stay sober for a certain amount of time. It was all these stipulations and services and things you had to do in order to get into housing. It is off the back, housing first is first. Everyone gets housing. It doesn't matter if you are an addict, if you have mental health issues, whatever your personal life circumstance is, you still deserve a safe, decent place to live every night. Then it is approaching them and working our case as a case manager. And you see here techniques such as harm reduction and motivational interviewing. And just to kind of elaborate on those terms for those that are not familiar, when we talk about harm reduction, I guess the the easiest way to put that for everyone to relate is if you have an individual that is an alcoholic, they wake up drinking, they drink all day, they can't keep a job because they're drinking, they constantly break lease agreement or rules and because they're drinking, right? We're working with them, we find housing, and our conversation as a case manager, social worker, is how can you stay in this housing, and what changes do you see yourself able to accomplish? And whether that is, it's go from drinking a whole 12 pack to only drinking 10 out of that 12 pack today, that's a success, and we celebrate their success every step of the way, no matter how small it is. That is the premise behind harm reduction. We want you safe. We want you to be able to stay in your housing. And the same with, drug users. You are in the streets, you are using multiple needles and sharing different harmful things for yourself that can cause additional harm. Then it's safer. You need to be in your home. You need to be where you're not endangering yourself and others around you. You're not being approached by police and going to jail because that long list of criminal charges prohibits you from getting into housing. And then our motivational interviewing is meeting someone where they are, having that discussion and talking to them about what they want. It's not what we want. It's not what we see how we live every day and what we see is the best for us. It really is working with them on what is best for them, and having that conversation, and whether that is, I only bring home $800 a month, but I know I need my beer every day that I'm going to purchase, and I'm going to spend $20 a day. Well, let's start with $4. I'm gonna spend $40 a day every day to make sure I can drink. Okay, we're looking at your budget when we're looking at what what comes in and what's going out, and it's like, no, Mr. Johnson, I really need you to only spend $30 on beer. And so that we can keep you in housing. Like, no one's telling you can't drink your beer or you can't, do what you want to do. But it really is, my goal is that at the end of the day, I want you to have somewhere to sleep at night. How can we get there? And they may come back and say, okay, maybe $35. Okay, it's a win. Hey, look at that. $5 more to go to food, utilities, rent, whatever that may be. It is not about trying to get them in a recovery program. You can mention recovery programs. You can tell them any type of resources out there. And when they are ready to take that step, is being that they, your engagement with them and the trust that you build with them would allow them to come to you if that's going to be a next step, and you're non-judgmental so that they can tell you, what makes this job even harder is when we're trying to house individuals and families and they have been shunned over and over again by decisions they've made in life, whether right or wrong. And they feel like they're going to be judged. So I am not going to tell you I'm a heroin addict. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you that I have all this stuff on my criminal background, because I don't want to be judged and I may not get housing because I'm sharing this with you. We're not a landlord. We're not a realtor company. We're not, it doesn't matter what your criminal background is. It doesn't matter if you're a sex offender. None of that's not our place. We're not there to judge. We're there to build this relationship and get everything everything, know everything, so that we can find the most appropriate housing intervention for you. And we're letting the client drive that conversation. We're letting the client drive what their goals are. And we're providing them options that they can choose to, take us up on it and participate, and they can choose not to. And we find this difficult in in our time currently because of the pandemic, because a lot of landlords do call and say, well, I have such and such living with me, living in my apartment complex. Y'all don't make them not drink. They're sitting on the porch with their beer in their hand. And isn't that a violation of the rule? Well, y'all, no, it's not our violation. It may be the apartment complex violation. And that is, again, having that conversation with the tenant. And we're going to get more into, you can go to the next slide, about lease violations and the tenant's rights and responsibilities, that then you're going back to them and you're talking, hey, like I said, I'm okay. You can drink your 10 beers instead of your 12 beers, but the rule in your lease that you cannot drink outside on your patio, open container, you can be arrested, you can lose your housing, so you're having those conversations and you're providing guidance so that they can stay in housing, but not taking away self-determination and their choice as adults. And so, part of the Housing First model is educating. I believe, Caitlin's on. So, we connect with Central Virginia Legal Aid Society. We stay up to date on what laws and bills that are coming down the pipeline and being passed down, so that we can educate everyone that we're assisting to get into housing, and they know their rights. They also, when we get into the lease bit of it, they also know what their responsibilities are. We make sure that they understand that rent is due. If you do not pay your rent, the landlord does have the right to proceed, charge late fee, whatever that may be, take you to court. So we make sure we are telling them there and sharing with them what they're signing when they're getting into these lease agreements, and what their tenant rights are, as well as who they could contact if something happens, like Central Virginia Legal Aid Society. And we're also there to advocate when landlords are not fully following the legal, rims of things and their roles and their obligations. So we are sharing that with the client to let them know, okay, if your landlord doesn't do A, B, and C, you do have a right to put your money in escrow in the courts. This is how that works. You do have a right to contact Central Virginia Legal Aid so they can assist. Next slide. As I talked a lot about client choice in housing. And again, that's from day one, from the time that we meet and engage them with outreach, it is client choice. And one thing that really, I guess, really gets to me is when people say, oh, those homeless individuals, they want to be homeless. They choose to be homeless. They don't, I tried to offer them help as just a citizen on the street, and I approached them and tried to help them, and they wouldn't take my help. Well, they don't know you. You're a stranger, just like we learned stranger danger when we're little. Like, they don't know you. And from an outreach perspective, you have to gain trust. You have to gain trust. You have to engage and allow the client to determine their housing resolution, whatever that may be. If it's an assisted living facility, what neighborhood, what what location, the cost of it, We come and clients are like, I want to live in, I don't know, Beverly Hills. It's not here, but I want to live there. And we're like, wouldn't we all want to live there? Let's look at your finances. Let's say you want this place for $2,000 a month. How are you going to pay it? So we're still allowing, you're still allowing client choice, but you're also, as the case manager or social worker, educating them again on what's out there and what housing is available to them. And it could be constraints, as you see here, that we all are seeing it right now as an agency ourselves in both the CACH COC and the Greater Richmond COC. It's a deficit in affordable housing. It has been. It's been an affordable housing issue pre-pandemic, and even more so now with the eviction moratorium. So it's not a lot of choices out there. So we also, is fighting that good fight to let people know that, yes, it is your choice, but this is also what realistically is available in the community for you to go into housing. And maybe right now, today, you don't want to be bothered with me and you don't want any housing, which is fine, but we are still here. You can still access services. You can always come back through the system. And when you are in housing, having that relationship with the agency that is providing any type of subsidy, or what we call a housing specialist, housing navigator, in some cases, case managers are providing all the housing services. We want to ensure that we make every effort to transfer people if they are not working out and they need a different housing situation. I worked with the severely mentally ill on a PAC team for several years. And, with PSH, it was a long-term subsidy, but, if someone took apart all their appliances and tried to set the place on fire, we have to move them. We work with the landlord to remedy any damages. We work with the tenant, again, to try to get them connected to some maybe mental health services. But we are not in a position to just throw our hands up and say, this person that is homeless can't be housed. Like, that's not housing first. Next slide. All right, benefits of housing, Jackie.
Oh, yes. Okay, sure. Yeah, so I'm going to go through these next few ones pretty quick just because I know we are running out of time. So benefits for housing for the client, access housing faster. That's the main thing that we want. Clients want housing, access housing faster. It's the biggest thing. Around 80% of households still remain housed a year after they're rapidly rehoused, which is a really helpful statistic to know because it really shows that people are not homeless because of something on their own part for the most part. 80% of people, you help them get housing, they keep their housing. And permanent supportive housing is long-term housing retention rate of up to 98%. That's pretty great. So that's awesome. And most clients participate in optional services. Again, as we've said, they do not have to. These are optional. They often do result in greater stability, especially, we get to advocate for our clients. Our views may hold a little bit more weight for landlords for all of that, which is always great. Yeah, and they're more likely to participate in job trainings, attend school, fewer instances of DV, and spend fewer days in the hospital because they are housed faster. Oh, we have more. Okay. So for the community, it's cost effective. We've been through that. The video, John Stewart, showed that pretty well. Generally results in cost savings. Housing first moves people away from dealing with problems towards preventing problems. always what you want, to be able to have a system that can actually help people in real time as like before it gets to a crisis, is the main thing, to have the community be able to come together, have this work before it becomes a crisis. So yeah, and then that last one you can read, cost savings, emergency services, versus how much the Housing First program costs. Pretty big difference. Real quick, success in CACH. So we've been working with with Community Solutions organization on a nationwide initiative, Built for Zero, which is like a methodology and movement, where we have been trying to achieve what they call functional zero. When we've been working on a subpopulation at a time. This is for veterans experiencing homelessness. So functional zero basically means that the average monthly housing rate is going to be greater than the number of actively homeless individuals. So this is just for our veteran population, this graph I'm showing you again. But that benchmark, that line you see right there, is functional zero, is not like 0 people, is functional zero, which for us is 3 people. Yeah, so there'll be more information on that coming soon, but just wanted to shout that out. Yeah. Oh, and there are 14 communities so far that have achieved functional zero for either chronic or veteran populations. There's like 83 other communities working with Built for Zero. Yeah, and we're in a few initiatives with them now, so probably more info to come at some point. And then just really, really quick, CACH data. So 93% of rapid rehousing participants exit to permanent housing in the last quarter, 2021, January through March. This is through St. Joseph's Villa Rapid Rehousing in Petersburg. So this just isn't including the SSVF Rapid Rehousing. But it's pretty great. It was 13 out of 14 people. 1 went to temporary housing. So no one exited to homelessness. There's more data there, and this is on all of CACH actively homeless, not just rapid rehousing, the bottom ones. All of the graphs, all of our CACH, all actively homeless. They'll be in the slides that we'll have available after this meeting if you want to go into it in more detail, or if you want more information, I can probably give you that. This me or someone else?
I don't know that we actually assigned this one. This is just some clarifications that Housing First is not a program, and a lot of people get confused with that. It is a model. It's a philosophy. It's how you implement your program, but it is not an actual program. Housing First is a recognition that everyone can achieve stability in real housing. Some people just need help doing so. It's about health, recovery, well-being. It's the foundation and platform for achieving these goals, and it's about changing the mainstream system from what it was to what it needs to be. And there's some resources for the PowerPoint, and here is all of our information. And now we're just going to go into quickly any questions if anybody has anything. Kailey, you want to close us out?
Okay, so Amanda asked if there are any questions, and hearing, okay. You're quite welcome, Caitlin, and thank you, Valerie, for saying great training. Appreciate it so much. You all are if you are not a member of CACH, of our coalition, then please take down, especially my email, and send me an email. Say, hey, I'd like more information on CACH, and I will be sure that you get that. We do plan on sending slides out, so if you're interested in that, then please, well, why don't you can put your email in the comments now if you want that, or you can email me later. I think that would about cover it. Does anyone else have anything to say, folks? Amanda, Jackie, Erica? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Wendy, okay. Got you, Wendy. Okay. Got you. Luz, okay. Anyone else? Okay, we'll make sure that you, Wendy and Luz, that you get them. And I saw one from someone earlier who wanted the slides. So very good. I think we are done for the day, at least for the training. Okay, Fatima, Fatima, got you. Thank you.
All right,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.